All right, thank you, Liz, and welcome everyone to our last webinar of the fall session of Open for Anti-Racism. We're really thrilled to have you here with us today, right before the holidays, and thank you for making the effort to come and listen to this presentation, this workshop with Suzanne and Amanda, who are, experts in this area, and the title of this is Practical Steps for Implementing Anti-Racist Teaching with Open Pedagogy. And one reason why we do this is, number one, we really love Amanda and Suzanne, but also year after year, we get back the surveys of our results. They're anonymized, but the majority of faculty say they still need more help around what open pedagogy is. So that's why we do an extra workshop on it. So here's our agenda. We're just gonna have a little congratulations to all of you for finishing and then talking about getting your fall stipends, which I think you might have gotten a message today from Liz about how to go ahead and submit for that. And then we're going to tell you about the spring calendar, which has been updated in the course as well. And then we'll introduce Amanda and Suzanne, and they'll take it away. So any questions before we get started? Hey there, Alan. All right. Well, I think you know me. I'm Una Daly, the CCCOER director, outgoing, actually. And I'm here with my co-director of Open for Anti-Racism, James Glabba-Grossklein. And
hey, everybody.
We've got Liz here. You want to say hello, Liz?
Hi, everyone. Glad to see you in person and not just lots of emails. So glad you could join us.
Wonderful. And do we have Kim and Joy here with and Maritez, our course facilitators for the fall?
Happy holidays, everyone. Hi.
Hey, Joy. Good to see you. I know everybody's rushing around, but I also Kim Gruey, who's an instructional designer at Northern Virginia, and Maritez Apigo, who is an English professor and DE coordinator at Contra Costa, rounds out our facilitation group. And how about our coaches? James, you want to introduce our coaches real quick?
Sure. We are so grateful to our coaches to support us in so many ways and support you all in so many ways. So Mary Tez, of course, from Contra Costa College, she's our lead coach. And we have the pleasure of Elisa Cooper from Glendale Community College in Arizona, professor of English, joining us. Gayatri Makadanda, I'm going to practice a few more times. Gayatri Manikandan from Compton College, professor of math. Another mathematician from Imperial Valley College, Alan Leone. And the next slide, we've got Deborah Crumpton from Sac City, teaches business. Anna Garcia, chemistry professor at Monterey Peninsula College. Cindy Sheeks from ECE and at Moorpark College, a neighbor of ours down here at College of the Canyons. And Hasna Sadat Ahadi, a counselor from Palomar College. We really appreciate all of you stepping up as coaches. And now, at this point, well over half of our coaches are completers of the OFAR program. So that's really fun to see, and that our participants want to continue giving back to the program and their colleagues.
Yeah, thank you, James. So big congratulations to all of you for completing your action plans and completing the course this fall. We know that it's a big lift, and so you're now on the final steps to complete the 2023 fall program, which is attending this webinar, or perhaps you're watching it later, but we hope you're with us this, I guess it's this afternoon. And to ensure that your invoices are processed on time, you're going to want to check in the grade book to make sure that all your assignments have been completed. That's our facilitators have let us know that you've done that, but what you may want to check is your required webinar attendance. So do check that and see that you've attended all 3 required webinars, and I'll mention which 3 those are in just a moment. And then for those of you who are team leaders, thank you for all that work that you do in addition to participating in the program. And it is time, if you haven't so far updated your OFAR administrator with what's going on at your college and what the faculty on your team and yourself have been learning this fall. So please do send a quick update, whether that's an email or if they're down the hall from you, you can do that in person, whatever works. But just let them know that you're continuing on with OFAR and what your plans are for the spring. All right, Liz, I'm going to turn over invoicing.
All right. Well, hopefully you all got the email I sent out this morning about invoicing. It had some invoice templates. If you didn't, please email me. And whether or not you have completed all the webinars yet, well, please send in your invoice. I will just wait to approve it until I get everything sorted out. And I know that the QuickBooks and filling out your W-9 information has not worked for some of you, so I will be reaching out to you next week and we will get that sorted out. But go ahead and send in your invoice in the meantime.
Okay, and Liz, you had a question from Greg Beyer.
Okay. No, we don't need a unique number on the invoice. Bill.com will take care of that. But if you want a unique number for your records, then go ahead and use whatever format works best for you.
Great, thank you, Liz. So very quickly, the 3 webinars that were required are on this table, and I'll just repeat it. It was the October 20th, Decolonizing Your Syllabus, very popular webinar that was given earlier by one of our coaches. The November 3rd Action Plan Project example. So this was when we had the past OFAR participants come in and talk about the programs that they had, projects that they had completed last year. And then today, practical steps for implementing anti-racist teaching with open pedagogy. And the webinar policy. Liz, do you want to mention this? Because I know you're the person who checks on this.
Right. So for the webinars, I manually update the gradebook in Canvas if you're attending the webinar live. So that has been done for the first 2 required webinars. And if you need to make it up, after you've watched the recording, please go into the required webinar makeup discussion area, which I believe is posted. A link is on the front page of the Canvas course, and do a little short description of your takeaways, and I will check that and update your webinar attendance. And this is a manual process, so please give me a little bit of time this afternoon to update your attendance for today.
Thank you, Liz, and thank you for supporting our faculty participants, especially those who do have conflicts from time to time. All right, over to you, James.
Great, thank you. So having completed the fall, of course, we're hoping you're turning your attention first to holiday break and spending time with friends and family and recuperating, but then turning your attention to the spring semester. So we're going to highlight very, very briefly the spring calendar. We will continue to provide monthly webinars. In Canvas, we'll ask you to write or record or create in whatever format suits you, individualized reflections throughout the spring. So you see the dates there, February 15th, April 1st, and May 31st. We ask the team leaders to continue to let their sponsoring administrators know that the team continues to be active and what your plans are. And then we ask you to check in with your coaches at least once a month. And hopefully those dates are already on your calendars. And then also research activities will begin through our partners, the RP group. We'll ask for your help in a couple of ways. First of all, towards the end of the term, there will be a post-survey to match that pre-survey that you took, of course. In addition, we'll ask you to distribute a link to your students so we are able to survey your students about their experiences in your classes. And of course, everything here is anonymized. It all goes straight to the RP group. Una and I don't, we don't know the results for individuals, let alone for colleges even. And then also we'll invite for volunteers, a small number of volunteers, 8 to 10 volunteers, to sit for interviews with our researchers to give qualitative feedback on the program as well. And then yeah, so we'll just watch for announcements and requests, emails and announcements in Canvas about those kinds of activities coming up. And then if you need specific help with implementing OER in the spring, you can reach out to the oer@canyons.edu team. If you need some help formatting some materials or finding materials, etc., just reach out to them. And next slide, Una. Then, so you see a big calendar with lots of information here. This is linked in the Canvas course in the announcement or the spot for the calendar. So you'll see a lot of different activities, just a couple of highlights here. You'll see the reflections there noted on the calendar. Following reflection 1 and 2, we've scheduled unwebinars, sort of unscheduled Zoom time for whoever wants to drop by. We think perhaps these will be good forums for reflecting on your reflection or giving a general sense of how's it going. We hear every year from participants that one of the things they value the most is the opportunity to interact with participants from other colleges. So this is one way we want to provide that space for you to hear what other colleges are doing or perhaps problem solve together with folks from other colleges. So pay attention to those. And again, this is all in the Canvas course. So next slide. Oh, yeah. Una, anything else?
Well, Michelle, oh yeah, hi Michelle, asked, are the volunteer interviews chosen randomly? And I just added, we asked for at least one person per team so that we have each college represented. The researchers prefer not to have all team leaders. So sometimes the team leaders will volunteer. Usually we have to ask people a couple of times because it's a busy time of the semester. So it's not random, Michelle, and we do let our researchers kind of make those final decisions if more than one person per team volunteers.
Thank you. Yeah, I cannot see the chat right now, so thanks so much for catching that. Sorry, Michelle. Okay, next slide then. So today's webinar, here we come to the good stuff. The webinar entitled Practical Steps for Implementing Anti-Racist Teaching with Open Pedagogy. You see the description here on the screen. We are so fortunate. Una and I both are just personally thrilled every time we get an opportunity to learn from Suzanne Joachim at Butte College and Amanda Taintor at Reedley College. I'm going to conflate their background, their bios, their introduction here for a second, because they're those people on your campus who do everything, do all the things, and do all the things really well, and everybody really likes them and are just they just share positive energy when they walk in the room and they know stuff. So both Suzanne and Amanda have been or are distance learning coordinators, SLO coordinators, OER coordinators. They speak widely on open pedagogy and OER. They've authored multiple OER textbooks themselves. They're just, great faculty colleagues from the system, do all kinds of wonderful things. So we are so happy to turn it over to Suzanne and Amanda.
Yes, so let me stop sharing. We had pictures of you guys, but I think we introduced you. So let me stop.
I was going so fast.
Yeah,
so, yeah.
I want to turn it over to
you. You get to the live Amanda and Suzanne rather than the pictures.
Yes. So hopefully you can see the slides. Let me just get myself situated here. Okay. So Amanda and I really love giving this topic, talking about this, because I think there's so many useful aspects where all of these concepts come together. And we're fairly fluid in our presentation style. So I've got the chat open. Amanda, I'm sure, has also got the chat open. If you have questions, feel free to type in the chat if you want to raise your hand. This is really a time for you to process through some ideas for the project that you're going to be doing in the spring. We wanted to start with a few foundational definitions so that we're talking about the same thing when we get to the later section of the session. And the first definition to start with is what is open pedagogy? One of the challenges with this seems like an easy question to answer, just a definition, but there's actually multiple definitions for open pedagogy. And this was really challenging for me at first because I come from the very traditional Western approach to education where there is a right answer and I can bubble it in and we're all good and happy. But there isn't a right answer. So I'm going to talk about just a few different approaches to open pedagogy. The first is from David Wiley, who, if you've, he's done a lot of things in the open world. One of the ones that we'll talk about a little bit later in this session is the idea of renewable assignments. So he's the person that came up with that concept and terminology. He defines open pedagogy as a set of teaching and learning practices only possible or practical when you have the 5R permissions, right? And you've learned the 5 R's for OER. And so his definition is really based on that part of OER, the 5 R's. Another definition comes from the Open Pedagogy Notebook, and in the attribution at the bottom of the slide is a link to their website, which has a lot of really great ideas on how open pedagogy is being done by different faculty in different disciplines. So a really great place to go get ideas and see what folks are doing. Their definition for open pedagogy is really focused on learners shaping the public knowledge commons. So that's what I've italicized below. That is my my italics, not theirs. But you can read the whole definition if you want to. So I'm pause and let me read that to you actually. I'm not sure how easy it is to see. An access-oriented commitment to learner-driven education and a process of designing architectures and using tools for learning that enable learners to shape the public knowledge commons of which they are a part. So this is a much more focused definition on learners contributing to the knowledge commons, which is a slightly different focus than the third definition. And this was proposed by Cronin in the OE Global presentation. And I really like this one because this one focuses on social and participatory learning, which we know is so helpful for students, especially for students that come from collectivistic cultures where working together is how they are used to learning. So this definition is use, reuse, and creation of OER and collaborative pedagogical practices employing social and participatory technologies for interaction, peer learning, knowledge creation and sharing, and empowerment of learners. That last phrase, I think, is also a key part of this, is we're trying to empower students to not just be passive recipients of knowledge, vessels waiting to be filled, if you will, but to be active participants in the learning process. That, I think, is a key part to open pedagogy. So as you notice, these are all three very different examples, but what they all get at is a kind of a core similarity. And I'm going to introduce one more thing that seems unrelated, but I'll bring it back around, I promise. When I was first looking through all the open pedagogy definitions, it reminded me of the concept of open government. So this slide is a slide that talks about different aspects of open government, but we can boil it down to participation, collaboration, and transparency. And this, I think, is a really good framework for thinking about what does open pedagogy mean for me when I'm trying to create something in my classroom. So if you think about government, right, there's different kinds of government. One is the I am the ruler of all and my students are my subjects, and hopefully I am benevolent. That's one approach. The open pedagogy approach is much more collaborative. So at the top here, notice transparency is a key aspect. Students should always know what they're doing, why they're doing it, and how they'll be graded. There should be no secrets. And Amanda, I think, is going to put into the chat the TILT framework link, which is a really great place to go and get examples of how you can build rubrics, how you can build assignments to make them very transparent. So TILT stands for Transparency in Learning and Teaching. And that's really the transparency part. On the left side is participation, and this is again what we were talking about before. Open pedagogy is all about students being an active participant in the classroom. But more than that, this is collaborative, where students are really brought backstage into the learning process, right? So we're explaining to them why we're designing the assignments this way, and working with them to maybe redesign the assignments to be maximally efficient for how they learn and how they can demonstrate their knowledge. So those are different ways to think about open pedagogy. I am going to turn this over to Amanda to talk a little bit about assessment.
Perfect. So you might be wondering why assessment. This is nowhere in the description does it say assessment, but I think that the connection and why Suzanne and I feel it's really important to spend a little time talking about the connection of assessment, anti-racist teaching, and open pedagogy. I hope that becomes very, very clear. We're going to make it so it is very obvious, that connection for you guys. I love quotes, and so that you'll see them pervasively on all of my slides, but Suzanne has made me cut them down very reasonably, and I'll show you the next slide and tell you a little bit about that as well. But I like reading the quotes as well because I think it's very powerful to hear these words spoken and not just read them. In higher education and in assessment, practitioners need to intentionally ask what majoritarian stories are informing our worldviews and how these potentially biased stories are distorting and silencing the experiences of others. And so this is what is really a lot at the core of what we think about when we think about anti-racist teaching. And assessment has such an important part in that process in our teaching. Because of our background as educators, the assessments we design come from our majoritarian view. And that's not for everybody, but all of us have gone through the current educational system and been successful. So in some contexts, we all adopt and have implemented that majoritarian view in our teaching strategies. Education trains us. We've got 16 plus years of education that has trained us in that majoritarian view. And it is really hard to push back against that, especially when it comes to assessments. So here's our what I call the cup of soup slides. They have all the quotes that I love. And so when Suzanne and I were putting the presentation together, she said, what about this? We can still give them to participants and we'll put them on a slide. So I swore that I would not read these quotes, and it's killing me not to, but the PowerPoint presentation you guys have access to, they're super powerful. So go on and read them. But that's the purpose of these slides. They're in here, but we're going to go through them. So why are we focusing on assessment? Anti-racist assessment forces us to ask what counts as legitimate truth. And just think about that. And pushes into questions of whose knowledge counts and who has access to the knowledge. When we, as the teacher in the course, choose to create an assessment around something, we are by default saying, this is what I value you to know. Otherwise, most of us wouldn't assess it. We offer all the content, we offer all the curriculum, but when we choose to assess something, we are saying, this is one of the things I find the most important for you to learn in this class. And so what we emphasize is what we're saying, this is the knowledge that counts. So we have to think intentionally about how we're developing those assessments, how we're implementing them, whose voice is being included in those assessments as well. We consistently spend time in our anti-racist work, not consistently, not as much as we probably should, looking at our curriculum and our content, but we need to spend that same amount of time looking at our assessments as well. So one of the ways that we can do that is by looking at deconstructing our assessments. And so deconstructed assessments use assessment as inquiry. And inquiry requires reflection, which allows other voices to come in. A deconstructed assessment increases emphasis on the use of qualitative assessment methods. Those that are, yes, harder to run through a Scantron machine or have Canvas auto grade, but they increase our ability to allow different voices into those assessment. Student involvement in the assessment process is important for a deconstructed assessment, and this is open pedagogy. We're going to create that connection a little bit more clearly in a second. Cultural responsiveness, instructors use an asset-based approach to teaching that includes students' cultures. And so there's a matrix that I discovered in some of the reading and research that I was doing that I feel really helps to visually explain how the intersection of students' voices and the utility of an assignment come together. So this is the theoretical matrix of culturally relevant assessment. You can look at the article that talks about this in the slides that we gave you for the handout and dive more deeply into it behind it. We certainly don't have time for me to go into a ton of depth on this, but as you look at this visual representation, a couple of the elements that you see, utility value. So when we look at our assessments, a high utility value helps individuals better understand themselves. So yes, it's an assessment of knowledge, but it's an assessment that has that high utility value so I can understand myself, my subjects. It provides students experiences that are useful to their further career. It's that utility value. And so if it's also that clarity, then students understand what's expected of them. Same thing like Suzanne was talking about on that TILT framework, the assignment expectations are very clear to me. So how does this connect to open pedagogy? When we bring students alongside us in creating our assessments, that increases both the utility value and the inclusive content. How the authors described gaps, is achievement gaps. I should have put that on there. And I know that that is a very charged word. The authors of the paper do go on and explain how they define achievement gaps, but that's what the gaps mean, is they're defining them as achievement gaps. So definitely go in and read the article. All of it is more clear. But I like this because it helps. It's a very broad overview of what we need to look at when we design our assessments. They need to have high clarity and high utility value. So let's look at equity in assessments. So how do we look at our assessments? Oh, nope, I can't do that one. It's got a cup of soup on it. So now we're going to go on and look at the backward design process. So Suzanne, you get to take over now.
Yeah, there's a lot of really wonderful quotes on here, which is why we put the links in the chat to this. You're welcome to read them at some point, depending on how you multitask. If you can hold off and wait until we're done, or if you want to read them now, all is good. But we want to cover a few more things because one of the words in the title was practical. And so we definitely want to get to the point where you can start thinking about how you can apply this in your project. So we're kind of flying through some of the definitions. One of the other definitions that we wanted to touch on is this idea of backwards design, which is a way to design our courses that separates the means from the ends. And here's what we mean by this. When you design a course using backwards design, you start with the end in mind. What do I want students to be able to do? For the SLO coordinator of me, and Amanda is also an SLO coordinator, it's hard not to just love outcomes for this because they are getting at the conversation between us and students. Here's the outcome of the course. This is what I want you to be able to do. That's where you start. In a lot of cases, faculty tend to design with that as the end piece, like they get there later. We're suggesting you start there. What do students need to be able to do? Then backtrack. How do I know they could do it? And then backtrack. How do I teach them to do it? So notice we are at the end of the process because it's really all about what students can do. That's the concept of backwards design. Another cup of soup that I'm not going to read into, but one of the important considerations is making sure students have agency in the course, agency in the assessments, and in their ability to demonstrate what they know. So this idea of student agency is core to what we're going to be talking about next, which is how do we design assessments that are anti-racist? And this can be really challenging because one of the things we have to do first is unlearn the way we've been assessing. Most of us, and not all by any stretch, but most of us have not been taught how to design assessments. We may have been taught how to teach, but assessment design and grading often gets forgotten about. And in most cases, the assessments we design are based on the assessments we were given, right? So we're just kind of carrying forward all of those biases from the dawn of time, I suppose, right? So this is a real good time to step back and think about, what am I trying to measure in my assessment? Not just what am I trying to measure, but what don't I want to measure? And I want to give you an example to demonstrate this. This is going to come from the world of biology because that's what I teach, but I think it applies across the board. The outcome, so the goal of this piece of the assessment, is to make sure students understand these terms. It's a list of vocabulary terms. Goal is for them to know what they are. So applies to a lot of things. The way I used to assess this is as follows. This was this brilliant multiple choice question. Loved this question for many, many years. What it's asking is, which relationship is different? So each of the answers has two terms. And in order to be able to answer this question, students have to know, one, what each of the terms means, but also be able to connect the two terms and figure out which of those connections are different. Those of us who have done SATs, this is a classic SAT question. Okay. I'm going to pause for a minute. In the chat, if folks can think about this for a little bit, what am I assessing here? Let's start there. What am I assessing? What is this question assessing? Yeah, Western logic, rote memorization. Yep. Vocabulary. Can I interpret this question? Yeah. I would have students come up to me after I gave this test, and they would ask, like, why am I dividing these terms? And when I first started teaching, you know, I was like, oh, honey, what do you mean dividing the terms? Don't you know? Like, did no one teach you? And after a few semesters of students coming up to me and asking, what does this question mean? I realized, oh, no one taught them. Like, literally no one has taught them. There's no reason for us to logically know that that division symbol means we're comparing, right? Those of us that went to a high school where we had lots of SAT prep classes, this makes sense. For students that didn't go to those kinds of high schools, this question is literal nonsense. Like, it doesn't even make any sense. They have no way to demonstrate their knowledge because they can't even understand the question. And so really what I was assessing is what high school they went to, which is not what I meant to assess, right? What I changed for how I've done this. So notice my outcome is still the same. Define the things, tell me how they're related. But I've opened this up and tell students, you can do this however you want. And so students will give me sometimes a list of definitions with, this is kind of like an outline view. Or they'll give me a table with definitions, or, oops, they'll give me flashcards. So this is an online flashcard tool, or they'll even handwrite the flashcards. They'll create mind maps. This is a much better way to assess this knowledge because students can use the format to demonstrate that works the best for them, right? And so opening up how they demonstrate their knowledge is a really important part of making assessments that are inclusive and allow students to demonstrate what they know. This is just one example. The same applies to if we're having them do more complex things like explain a process. If the assignment is write an essay explaining a process, notice I'm assessing two things. Do they know the process? And can they write an essay? And that is, that means I don't know which of those two. When a student doesn't do well, I don't know if it's because they don't know the process or because of their writing skills. And again, with this kind of assignment, I would encourage folks to remove the, separate the ends from the means. The end is what I want them to show. The mean is how do they show it? Let them show it in the way that works best for them. So a few specific examples. Amanda?
Okay, so let's dive a little bit more deeply in co-constructing assessments. If you've ever heard Suzanne and I talk, we are totally 100% in love with universal design for learning. And there's a lot of terms that float around in the educational space, and we use a lot of terms here in this presentation as well. But what's important to understand is things like UDL, OEP, and anti-racist teaching, they're not synonymous. So you can do one well and do the other horribly, but nor are they mutually exclusive. And so we want to spend a little bit of time saying, how can all of these different concepts that perhaps you really, really love weave together in how you do your assessments in your course? So I love the concept of a project-based approach to teaching. I come from early childhood. I see Cynthia's out there. And so, of course, that is what I did with even the infants in my class when I was an infant teacher many eons ago. And so the visual is of young children, but this isn't just a young child approach. The project-based learning is a really great way to implement anti-racist assessments into your course. A UDL approach to assessment is a socially just approach, as it considers the abilities of each learner and the deficits in the educational environment and system, not the student. And so a true project-based approach, if you're looking at it for your assessments, allows a learner to display their knowledge in a way that meets the outcomes that you're looking for, just like Suzanne was talking about, but they get to choose the method that they display that assessment. If you're looking at, I just want to see that you understand the nervous system, they can choose the mechanism that best fits them, that modality that best fits them. If they're a fantastic writer, then perhaps that's the best modality. Allowing students that choice in how they do their assessment acknowledges that me as a teacher, I can't know the best way for you to express your knowledge. It validates your lived experience as a student and your authentic self, because I haven't lived that experience, and I need to give you that opportunity to display your knowledge in a way that validates who you are. It can be a tough place to be as a teacher because you're allowing students that choice, and we have to scaffold them in that process. Anti-racism pedagogy is characterized by community-engaged, project-based learning and a collaborative design with students, which is a very vulnerable place to be. But I'm allowing students to express their community, their personalities, and the cultural values that they're coming from in that assessment, whether it be a math assessment, a child development assessment, by me allowing them the choice, that's going to be infused in what they choose as a demonstration of their knowledge. So let's get a little bit more practical and look at, okay, so how do we assess that knowledge? If we have students that are submitting all sorts of different ways of that knowledge, me as an instructor, how do I assess that knowledge? I'm a big fan of single point rubrics. I love rubrics. Now, I used to hate them, but a single point rubric was my entry point into understanding, okay, this is a really important part of having transparency in my teaching. I felt when I initially when I started teaching, rubrics were too prescriptive. I want students to be able to express themselves. But as I gained more insight into how the transparency and what I was looking for is apparent in a rubric, I really fell in love with what they could do for students, but I also really love a single point rubric. And so single point rubric is just that it looks right here. What is the criteria that means you have demonstrated to me proficiency in whatever the outcome is? So how does this integrate with open pedagogy then? There's no reason why we can't engage students in the conversation of what should the outcomes be for this assessment? How would a student demonstrate their knowledge of this assessment? When we bring students into the conversation of creating our rubric, we can make sure that we're acknowledging all of their lived experiences and not using those terms and those words that come from as the instructors, perspective. So we bring them in and we help look at that vocabulary word. It's an easy way also to enter if you're thinking, oh, this open pedagogy thing, this seems a little bit too much for me right now. I'm just implementing, X, Y, Z, whatever it might be. Bringing students into the conversation of creating the rubric with them is an easy step into that space with them. Or if you have students that are new to the academic environment and the thought of engaging in a more robust form of open pedagogy might be too much for them at this moment, then this is a great single step towards that. It lets them know that as a co-contributor to the educational experience, they are valued because they see their words and they see their input on those rubrics that you have in your Canvas assignment or wherever you might be implementing them. Gregory, did I answer your question? I'm not sure when it came up. Oh, no, you just put it in there. So the single means just that single point. Like, this is what proficiency means. I'm not a big advocate on this is what exceeds means because I want students, this is what proficient is. And so the single point is this is what it means to be proficient in that skill that I've identified. Did that help, or did I just talk around it? Or satisfactory, yes. Whatever term works for you. Satisfactory, meets requirements. I like proficiency. Some even use mastery. I have strong opinions about that I won't talk about right now, but I love proficiency. Still developing would be on the other side. So for me, a single point rubric is here is what it looks like to be proficient. There are so many different ways that still developing might look for an individual student. And so that's where I fill it in manually in that single point rubric. So if you look at the rubric, you can see there's still developing and then maybe there's exceeds. So that allows me that personalized, that humanized feedback for students to say, here are the gaps that I see missing in what you've submitted in your assessment. Okay, perfect. And so here's another way that you can engage students. If you have a very specific rubric, so this is taken from one of our math faculty by permission, and you've developed this rubric, if you have very specific elements that that a student needs to demonstrate, and you say, hey, I don't have time or capacity to throw this out and have them define each of these places. I have all of these specific variables, then you can engage students in a conversation of revising the language to make it more clear in the rubric. If you're teaching a fully online class, this is a great discussion board post. I hate discussion board posts. I use them as community learning opportunities. And this is a great way to engage in a community learning opportunity. Students can talk and engage and say, hey, I don't like this term in there. This is confusing to me. And in that process, that in itself is a way to be able to assess what knowledge students might need better support in doing. So having a conversation with students and engaging them and bringing them in on how can this rubric be revised to use terms that reflect your experiences, that are less confusing, that don't reflect just my lived experience, is a great way to be able to engage also in that open pedagogy conversation. And then more beautiful quotes on the process of co-creating rubrics and how that process is really valuable in engaging in anti-racist pedagogy. One of the elements that can happen when we walk through and begin open pedagogy is if we use it in a high stakes setting, students can be really afraid to make mistakes in that process. So not only in open pedagogy, but I'm a huge advocate, if you've ever heard me present before, of allowing students low stakes or no stakes opportunity to practice their skills. And so here's what a gradebook might look like to allow students to practice those skills and make it a not graded part of those experiences. So when you're asking students to engage in that process in an open pedagogy process or to co-construct, say, a rubric, you don't want to make it so that it has a high point value, and my preference would be no point value. Allow them the opportunity to practice that skill, provide feedback in a way that isn't threatening to that vulnerability and that place. I know that from my experience, if I've taken a professional development course and they're asking me to be vulnerable, they're asking me to self-reflect, they're asking me to give my opinion, but it's something that's graded, I'm much more likely to say what I think the teacher wants to hear than allow my true self to be seen. So we really want to allow students the opportunity to practice without having punitive implications for that practice or for that opportunity to express themselves.
So we're going to shift slightly here, because what we've been talking about is how do you build the assessment so that it's inclusive, culturally responsive, and that's good. But we haven't really addressed the anti-racist part directly, and we thought that that was an important thing to do here. One of the things that we often hear from faculty as they start creating anti-racist content and assessments is, how do I do that in my discipline, right? And so we wanted to give a few examples of how to approach that, and some important things to keep in mind when you're looking at this for your own discipline is we need to move away from the idea of learning as being purely objective. And my STEM colleagues, we tend to be particularly well-rooted in this, right? Our disciplines are objective, and that is not, in fact, true. All learning occurs in a cultural context. Beyond that, though, our current understanding is built on history, and so we need to understand the history of how we came to know what we know. And the history of many of our fields can be deeply problematic. And these are all things that are worth addressing with students and addressing as part of our what we assess student knowledge. So it's not enough, in my opinion, to just assess, do students know the fact? But it's also important for them to understand where the fact came from and how we came to understand it. Some examples of where we can build in history in our various disciplines to help students understand how we came to our current knowledge. And these are all examples of deeply problematic histories. I'm not going to talk about these because we don't really have enough time to do them justice, and we certainly don't have time to process through them. I know when I first learned about a few of these, it took a long time to really come to terms with, this is how my discipline came to understand what we know now. But in biology, there were Tuskegee studies that you can look at. Psychology also has a problematic history with measuring intelligence and their approach to mental illness. Education in general, if you haven't learned about the American Indian boarding schools, definitely worth looking into. I use that phrasing because that is what they were called at the time. So that is their name. In art, right, the ideals of beauty and how we express what is beautiful. In anthropology, classification of races, really fascinating things to help students in our disciplines understand how we got here, right? These are all things that can be wrapped into our topics. And it's not just history, right? One of the other kind of approaches folks have is, well, that happened in the past, we're better now. There's still a lot of problematic events happening in our individual disciplines. And these are just a few. In your own discipline, you know, I'm sure you can identify others. But in medicine, lots of issues with race in medicine. There's a great TED Talk link there that does a really good job of expressing that. In marketing, lots of built-in problems with how we market and to whom we market and what we market to different people. Algorithmic bias, as AI has become more of a thing, this has become more of an issue, right? There are some very deeply seated biases in our algorithms because they are built on what we have known, right? So if you feed in bias, you get out bias, even if the process itself of the computer algorithm is not biased. If what we're feeding in is biased, the outcome will be. Redlining has been an issue for a long time, both physical redlining and digital redlining. And really in any of our fields, we can address with students that their background in education can affect their success in various classes, and not as a way to blame, right? It's not about blaming or deficit mindedness. It's about understanding that where we come from affects how we learn and how we demonstrate our knowledge, not as a bad thing, but just as a way of understanding that all different ways of demonstrating knowledge need to be validated as valid. Okay. So let's go into some open pedagogy examples specifically. And Amanda, this is back to you.
So many of us are familiar with a traditional open pedagogy option of writing text with students, but what are some other ways to create open pedagogy opportunities that possibly are tied to our assessments or not? They don't have to be. But these are those renewable type of assessments, meaning that they are things that are high utility value and are meaningful and useful for students. Adding to Wikipedia is a great way. Wikipedia is dominated by a very majoritarian viewpoints because that is who traditionally has had access to that form of displaying knowledge base. So work with students and scaffold them to find things in Wikipedia that are missing voices that are not from the majoritarian viewpoint. If you have an open textbook, find ways that you can add case studies or sidebars to the text. Maybe students aren't comfortable saying or rewriting a text or adding content, but they can add some additional content. And in platforms such as LibreText, this is super easy to do, to add just a quick case study. I'm having a lot of fun actually doing it in the infant toddler book that I co-authored by bringing in infant and toddler caregivers from different backgrounds and how they arrived where they are and working with young children. And so that's coming from different students from around Central Valley and other places. But have them go through, as if you're using an OER textbook, which I'll always plug for that, say, hey, we can revise this and put some case studies or some additional information. Create a class website that you can store those repositories repository of findings. We'll have an example in the BC Student Toolkit in just a second, where you can see those types of repositories that are super easy to create. You can even just create it in your Canvas course, make a wiki page or something along those lines. Share links through Digo, Pinterest, Raindrop, all of those bookmarking sites for students to be able to say, hey, here's a different viewpoint, here's a different voice that I really found powerful. Let's bring it into the course content, and have them help to curate different voices for your class that they personally resonated with and they would like to see integrated into the curriculum and the content. Community annotation with tools such as Hypothesis and Perusal also help students to add their voice and their thoughts and their viewpoints without having to go fully into rewriting a text or contributing to the textbook. So how do I engage in assessment strategies, or how do I start working with students to walk down this process? It doesn't need to be done in groups or individually. Think what is the best fit for your class, for your students, and it can change. You just need to look and see what is going to work best for this group of students. And you can even ask them. Sometimes we think we have to have these decisions beforehand, but you can have a conversation and you can allow for choice. Hey, if you guys want to work as a group, if you want to work individually in these processes, it doesn't need to be a one or the other. Allow students to build on the work of previous students. And this is also an interesting way to see how different viewpoints in class are expressed with one another, and have them think through the previous students' expression of their authentic selves and how a future class might agree or disagree with what they think needs to be in the content or curated resources for future classes. Big thing, remember, you don't have to be the expert. At least for me, in going through my educational training, I felt like, okay, the teacher has to know everything. And I know when I first started teaching, I felt like I could never say, I don't know. Now that's one of my favorite things to be able to say to students is I don't know. I've only had these experiences and this very narrow educational path. Please bring in your viewpoint and help to inform me what is missing in my content, what is missing in my assessments, what I need to change. If you're engaging in open pedagogy, make sure you give students the choice of sharing or not. This should always be an option if they just want to submit it to you, if you're using it for an assessment of knowledge, or if they want it shared with other students or out to the world. And in that, you need to help teach them about the Creative Commons license and what it means to share. That's one of the pieces that has to be integrated in this process. And so we curated just a couple of resources that you can use for permission templates for students to share their work. And I don't think those links showed up. So for some reason, they're not showing up in the slide, but the brilliant Suzanne will put the links in the chat, I'm sure. But the Open Pedagogy Student Toolkit from BC Campus is fantastic. It has examples that students of how to walk through students through engaging in your pedagogy. And they also have separate permission forms in there that you can give students, and also walking them through explaining what a Creative Commons license is. So I'm not sure why they're not showing up on this slide, but we gave you a copy of our slides. You can see there, and Suzanne brilliantly put those links right in the chat for us. And then the last quote that I want to leave you with: anti-racist pedagogy, as acknowledged by Kishimoto, focuses on the process of learning, not necessarily making students reach a uniform prescribed outcome. Anti-racist teaching challenges the Eurocentric curriculum and the apolitical and ahistorical approaches to education, discipline, and course materials. By encouraging faculty to co-construct syllabi, assignments, and assessment with students in the hopes of diminishing the historical power differential between the two groups. And does it count if we ended right at 1 o'clock? Sorry.
No, you're welcome. You're welcome to continue.
So our last slide really was just examples on in your field. And this was, if we had time, opportunities to engage in how you might have been doing open pedagogy and not even realized it, given our conversation, or things that you see in your field that really need to be addressed. And students can help you to looking at changing that content and co-creating with them to get those issues addressed. So that was it. That was our last slide. Suzanne, anything you wanted to add?
No, other than I can stay for a little longer if folks have questions, or if they want a little bit of processing, because yeah, as Deborah mentioned, we give a lot of information very quickly. So I imagine you'll need some time to process, but that's all the information we had. So yeah.
Well, thank you both. And I just posted the link to the survey for our participants, and let us know how it went for you today. And thank you so much, Suzanne and Amanda. And thank you for being willing to hang out for a little while in case people want to follow up with you.